what Bill C-8 does is it gives the Minister of Public Safety the right to kick Canadians off the internet. And so if you are an internet service provider, the minister can tell you, okay, we want Jason or John or Sally or Susan to get kicked off the internet. We're hereby ordering you to no longer provide telecommunication services, which includes, radio, podcast, telephone, internet, everything. They can order companies to stop providing these services to individual Canadians.
John Carpay, thank you for your time today, sir. I'm really looking forward to this conversation.
I'm glad to be with you, Jason, and with your viewers and listeners.
Yeah, well, I've been meaning to reach out to you guys for the longest time. The JCCF has been in the middle of everything. Every time I see something pop up from you guys, I'm like, oh man, I am so happy that somebody is out there who knows what they're talking about, tackling these issues. And thankfully, we're finally able to connect. And John, before we start, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of your background, people who may be unfamiliar with you and your work?
So myself, I'm originally from the Netherlands. I grew up in British Columbia. I have a political science degree from Laval University in Quebec City, where I studied political science en français, picked up French while getting my degree. Lived in Ottawa briefly, worked on the Hill briefly, back to BC, and then moved to Alberta at the age of 28 to start law school at the University of Calgary, and worked for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation for 4 or 5 years. I was in Edmonton as the Alberta director. I have, for the past 20 years, been working in pro-freedom legal advocacy. The Justice Center is a registered charity. We are a national organization. We have a team of staff lawyers from British Columbia to Quebec, taking on cases in every province. We defend the freedoms of expression, association, peaceful assembly, conscience, religion, parental rights, the rule of law, travel, mobility, bodily autonomy, which includes the right not to get injected with a substance that you don't want to get injected with. And I'm proud to say the Justice Center was the only civil liberties organization in Canada to call for an end to lockdowns. There are other civil liberties groups that, kind of disagreed with some of the COVID restrictions. They said, they went too far. But fundamentally, they didn't really disagree with lockdowns. They didn't really disagree with vaccine passports. They just kind of took exceptions to some of the rules, whereas our position was we called for an end to lockdowns in May of 2020 because they're not based on sound science. They're not based on medicine. They're just based on a lot of media propaganda. So that's the Justice Center. We are funded entirely by voluntary donations from Canadians. We don't ask for or receive any government funding. And with a lot of the vaccine mandates and travel restrictions and lockdowns, we fought cases all over Canada. Those cases are mostly behind us, and our current focus is resisting the tyranny of bills C-2, C-8, and C-9, among other things.
Yes, and that's exactly why we're here today, man. So just to kind of share a little bit of my own story with this, I noticed your guys' work early on in the pandemic. I think by week 2, all of us kind of realized that we were being hustled, at least the people with paying attention with a average intelligence. And you guys were on it right away. I was online kind of looking for information, and your foundation was the first one that I found. And you guys were very, very active during that period. So now in the aftermath, we are facing a trifecta of tyrannical bills here in Canada, oddly bills that seem to mirror other bills that are being passed through Parliament in Britain, Ireland, and other places. So, John, what I want to do today is I want to walk through these bills with you. I want you to tell, we have a large, okay, so for our American listeners, we have a very large American audience. Guys, this is important to you too. And the reason why is because this is coming your way. Although this is happening in Western Europe and now is arriving in places like Canada and Australia, the Indians are circling the wagons. You guys are next. So pay close attention. So, John, let's start with Bill C-2. Can you give just a brief overview of what looks like an omnibus bill, what's in it, and why Canadians need to be concerned about certain aspects and certain things that are buried inside of that bill?
So Bill C-2 is the Strong Borders Act. I think it should be called the Strong Surveillance Act. It does have provisions that probably a lot of Canadians would agree with to tighten up our refugee system, requiring, for example, that if you are coming into Canada and you want to claim that you are fleeing religious or political persecution, that you are actually a refugee, you need to make that claim within 2 weeks of coming into Canada. You can't just kind of live here and then, 2 years later make a refugee claim. That's just one example. So there are provisions in it that are, probably supported by a lot of people that don't really threaten our civil liberties as Canadians. However, they have inserted, for example, the right of Canada Post to do to open letter mail without a warrant. They have criminalized the bill would criminalize the use of cash in amounts 10,000 or more. So if you were donating $1,000 a month to the Justice Center in cash, you'd be breaking the law by October, because that's $10,000 cash, even if it's broken down into separate parts. So that would become criminal, which is obviously it's a threat. It's a step towards central bank digital currency, where cash becomes illegal and the government controls every dollar in the economy, right? Because there's no more cash. So we have also the Authorized Access to Information Act, which is brand new legislation that Bill C-2 is putting in place that gives a host of different government officials the right to inspect the computers and cell phones of electronic service providers. When you look at the definition of electronic service provider, it includes anybody who sends out emails. So every church, every charity, every nonprofit, every business in Canada becomes subject to warrantless searches. So those are some of the concerns of Bill C-2. It's 140 pages, right? And they're doing this. They should bifurcate it. We should be able to have an honest discussion on refugee process and procedure and immigration and have that carved off. And, if the government wants to criminalize the use of cash above a certain amount, we should have a separate bill and a separate debate on that. But they lump it all together. So that's C-2.
Yeah, and it seems like one of those bills where they jam it all together so that when conservatives or anyone really in Parliament inevitably votes against it, they're going to say, well, they voted against tougher immigration laws and stricter borders, right?
Yeah.
And that's going to be the line in the legacy media. It's not going to, they're going to conveniently omit anything about warrantless searches and anything like that, right? So that's why they jam it all together and they bury the stuff underneath that so that anybody votes against it immediately gets dragged through the mud in the media, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Bill C-8 is the Cybersecurity Act. Like everything else, Jason, it's all for our own good. It's to keep us safe, right? We got to be kept safe from hate and safe from misinformation and disinformation. So the cybersecurity legislation, Bill C-8, of course, it really tugs at the heartstrings. It says we want to keep Canadians safe from malfeasance, from hackers and fraudsters and even terrorists, foreign state actors. We want to keep our telecommunications system safe. Okay, fair enough. We already have laws against hacking. If you hack into, whether it's the government or a private business or whoever, you better be operating under an assumed name that's 4 times removed and never be discovered, because that's criminal, and damaging property is criminal. Damaging government internet or software or computer systems is already criminal. I don't know if we need better enforcement, but what Bill C-8 does is it gives the Minister of Public Safety the right to kick Canadians off the internet. And so if you are an internet service provider, the minister can tell you, okay, we want Jason or John or Sally or Susan to get kicked off the internet. We're hereby ordering you to no longer provide telecommunication services, which includes, radio, podcast, telephone, internet everything, they can order companies to stop providing these services to individual Canadians. I'm sorry, that's not necessary for protecting our. You don't need to give a new power to federal cabinet ministers to kick individual Canadians off the internet. Furthermore, this Bill C-8 gives the Minister of Public Safety and other federal cabinet ministers the power to tell a company to do anything or refrain from doing anything if the minister perceives there to be a threat to the Canada's telecommunication system. So that's worded very, very broadly. A threat can be whatever the minister reasonably believes is a threat. There's no express provisions to protect free speech. So if you or I are writing a very polemic, vociferous, aggressive editorial online, the federal cabinet minister could say, well, you're threatening the telecommunication system, so we're going to kick you off the internet. So that is a big problem with Bill C-8.
And just to kind of reframe this for people watching, the way this works is it's not Melanie Jolie or whoever at the Liberal government sitting there with a switch that gets flipped on and off. What they do is they send an order to your internet provider, threatening to, pull licenses, pull approvals for certain things if they do not remove this person from their network. So the way that this is going to be instituted and the way that it's going to be executed is through the provider itself. So you're never really going to know. What's going to happen is your provider is just going to shut you down and basically say, you're no longer a customer of XY provider. And they can do that because they're a private company. Right. But really where the pressure is coming from is that it's coming from the Liberal government and the CRTC. Now, John, before we move forward, I just want to revisit something really quick with C-2, because a friend of mine, Elliot Daniel from the Right Call podcast, pointed this out to me, that with the warrantless search of electronic devices, smartphones, laptops, tablets, etc., the one thing that they can do, which hasn't really been brought up in a lot of conversations, is that they can scrape the data out of those devices. They can take all your data. They can steal all of your communications with people. So that's why this is dangerous. This isn't just standing in line at customs at the airport and they scroll through your phone to see if you're a terrorist. No, they're literally taking the image off of your phone and collecting that. So any private data that you own, think about all of the communications that you have in your devices. The government, just at whatever whim they have, can take it from you. Right, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And they can order private companies to turn over subscriber information. That's another thing under Bill C-2. They can say, okay, we want the name. They can go to TELUS or Rogers or some large company and say, we want the names of your subscribers and we want their IP addresses. And you have to turn that over. This is how big the bill is, right? Like we need like a 3-hour podcast to really get through, the whole thing. Going back to C-8 for a moment, the other part of it, so the minister can issue an order to tell a telecommunications service provider, which is any company providing one or more of internet services or phone services, they can tell the company to kick somebody off the internet. The minister's order can also have a provision in it saying this order must be kept secret. And so it becomes illegal to talk about it. The fines for violating an order are up to $50,000 per day for individual citizens, for you and me, for regular citizens, per day of non-compliance with the minister's orders, up to $50,000 per day, which, unless you're a billionaire, it's big enough to bankrupt any individual pretty quickly. For corporations, the penalty is $15 million per day is the maximum penalty. So this is going to be, if this gets into law, you can bet every company is going to obey immediately. If they get an order from the minister, at the risk of a penalty of $15 million per day for non-compliance, you can bet your last dollar that every company is going to comply. And then in terms of challenging it, theoretically, you can go to court. This is the disconnect. The Bill C-8 legislation says you can challenge the minister's order in court. Problem is, not everybody's got the $100,000 sitting in the bank that you can afford to basically spend on litigation, which will take 2 or 3 years because litigation almost always does take 2 or 3 years. So yeah, theoretically you can challenge the minister's order, but it's going to cost you $100,000 and take 2 or 3 years if you even win. You might spend $100,000 and after 2 or 3 years, you get a court ruling that upholds the minister's order. So you're really toast. Like there's no effective, if this becomes law, there's no effective way to quickly remedy the situation.
Yeah, and just to kind of reinforce what you're saying for people out there listening, like take heed to John's words, man, because the thing is there are a lot of people who attempted to challenge the federal government on vaccine mandates, a lot of people who attempted to challenge the federal government on other things, simple things, illegal search and seizures, and they weren't able to they've never been able to get their day in court because the government, the size of our bureaucracy in Canada is so heavy and the weight is so cumbersome that they can bury you before you even get there. Right? Like they can bankrupt you before you even get to court. And at that point, if you can't afford to pay lawyers or anything, you're out of luck.
Well, it took us 2.5 years. We filed a challenge against Alberta's lockdowns in December of 2020. We finally got a ruling July 31st, 2023. So it was 2.5 years to get a court ruling when we brought a challenge, basically say our charter rights and freedoms are being violated like right now by Jason Kenney's lockdown orders, right? We didn't have our freedom of association. It was illegal to have Christmas dinner with your parents or with your adult children or with people not residing in the same house. Couldn't have Christmas dinner together. It's illegal to have outdoor protests. We get people getting big tickets for walking their dog outside or playing basketball alone outside or peacefully protesting at the legislature. It was absolute tyranny. So we take that to court, and the judge, cheerfully allows the government 3 months to put its evidence together, which is outrageous. The government had been saying on the news every single day, they said, all of our measures are backed by science. It's all evidence-based. They should have been able to put together their evidence in a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks at most to gather all the evidence. If these lockdowns were really based on science, the government could have brought everything together in short order, and we could have had a hearing and a trial right away. Instead, the court gives the government 3 months to collect this evidence. When they finally collect it, it's a bunch of stupid modeling. There's no compelling rationale. There's certainly no evidence that lockdowns were scientific. And yet it still took 2.5 years. So that's how litigation goes. So, I mean, of course, it's good that you can take the minister's order to court. I'm glad that that's possible, but it's not an effective solution.
No, and remember too, everybody listening, like this is an organization of established and experienced lawyers. This isn't just a group of protesters. These are lawyers who know the system, and knowing the system and having experience in it. It still took you all 3 years to get to
2.5. And Brian Peckford's case, we filed right away to challenge these travel restrictions. Right, if you had not been injected with the supposedly safe, supposedly effective substance, both claims unproven at the relevant time, you couldn't get onto an airplane. In that court action, even though it was wrongfully dismissed as moot, which was a disgrace and just disgusting, but in that court action, we had federal government officials admit under oath that there was no medical or scientific basis for the requirement that only people who were injected could travel on airplanes. It was admissions by government officials under oath. So that was great. That was a really good result, even though the court action was dismissed. But that court action as well, it took years to wind its way through. But it's a good accountability measure, right? Because we get the donations, so we pay the full-time staff lawyers, so they're on salary, so it's a lot cheaper than paying an outside law firm. And through that model, we're still able to offer a lot of resistance against the government. But there's no way that individual Canadians, they can't spend $100,000, $200,000, $300,000 on litigation.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. So coming back to C-8, John. So the pretext that justifies everything they're trying to do is hate speech, right? And a lot of people have said this before, but I'll reiterate: hate speech is troublesome because it's subjective. unto itself, right? What's hate speech to you is not hate speech to me, and what's hate speech to the next person is not hate speech to us. And so what we're talking about is laws are already interpretive, right? Judges and lawyers there's always what's called precedent in just about any case, and that's relying on a previous interpretation of a law in order to either bolster the prosecution or the defense. What we're doing is we're taking this a step further, and we're saying that this X person's feelings was hurt by Y person's behaviors, and because of that, Y person needs to be removed from being able to communicate. But there is an additional component to this. LGBTQ and racialized people, which is the Canadian federal government's way of saying people with brown skin, these are all protected groups, right? So if you have a member of a protected group making a claim against somebody who's not a member of a protected group, in terms of equity, diversity, equity, inclusion, it gives them leverage over the person who's not part of a protected group. Whereas if you flip that around, if I made a complaint against somebody who's a member of a protected group, let's say my church put a rainbow flag on their lawn, and I had a problem with that, and I made a complaint. Well, my complaint under this context is moot because they're a protected group, right?
That's generally how it works in practice. I mean, in theory, okay, so we've got these laws, by the way, have been on the books for 30 years, but Bill C-9, which I can get into in a moment, makes them worse than what they already are. So it's illegal to willfully promote hatred against a group that can be identified on the basis of race, ethnicity, national origin, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, gender expression, age. So you have these prohibited grounds. And human rights legislation provincially, which is not criminal, but they have similar provisions. You get people like, Bill Whatcott in BC has got, there's a case, he had flyers that questioned the transgender narrative. And he said there was some transgender NDP candidate. And he said, it's impossible. No matter how badly you mutilate your body, like a man can't become a woman and a woman can't become a man. He pulls no punches in what he says and how he says it. And there's even people actually that agree with Bill Whatcott, but they really dislike his choice of words. Anyway, he's ordered to pay, I don't know if it's $50,000 or some other amount. It was just obscene. And the way that these things work in practice is that the courts will look at whether they look at it through the woke lens. Are you a victim group?
That's right.
So if somebody went on the internet and said, white people are evil, we should kill all the white people in the world, they're not likely to get, technically, that is a violation of the willful promotion against hatred. If you were to say that, you're not likely to get prosecuted because you've got this woke equity, diversity, inclusion ideology has infiltrated and infested the police forces to a considerable extent, the Crown prosecutors, the judiciary, certainly the law schools. So the entire legal establishment, the justice system, has a woke bias whereby you're not going to get in, if you're picking on males, heterosexuals, whites, Christians, Jews, you're not going to get in trouble. Now, solution is not, you could say, well, we should just prosecute everybody fairly. I think it's better just to get rid of these provisions entirely because they do cast a chill on discourse where people are having to look over their shoulders and make sure that they've worded their thing correctly. Like in the United Kingdom, you could still legally criticize immigration. You could say, I disagree with current immigration policies. I think such and such. And you might not get the knock of a policeman on the door. But if you're not careful about what you say about immigration in the United Kingdom, you can wind up in jail.
Yeah. And that's a very real a very real possibility. And just to add to what you said about protected groups, myself personally, my mother is Plains Cree Indian. I'm what you would consider Métis. And if you want to talk about not just the devastation that creating victim classes does to the people on the outside, but also the people on the inside of that victim class, look no further than every reservation across Canada and the United States. they're a disaster. And it's because you created a victim class and you've made an entire group of people believe that they are victims and entitled to special treatment. Right. And I completely agree with you. We need to abolish all of it. If we're a society that is bent on equity on all levels, then what we need to do first and foremost is abolish any special treatment for any group in all victim classes, all of them. Right. If we want to consider ourselves all on equal footing, then that's just what has to happen.
Free people are not equal, and equal people are not free.
That's it.
You know, at the end of the day, the best policy that also leads to the least amount of social strife and the most amount of harmony between groups is where we're in a society where the law does not treat people differently based on their ancestry, ethnicity, their descent, whichever term you want to use. You can call it race, ancestry, descent, ethnicity, any of those four terms. What can create social harmony and unity amongst people is if we see ourselves first and foremost as human beings. I mean, nobody denies we have characteristics, right? We have a gender or a sex. I think there's only two of those. We have a sex, we have a skin color, we have particular ethnic ancestry. Most people have, many people have a religion. Everybody has a belief system of some kind, even if they're not formally with an identified religion. So we've got all these characteristics. We have sexual proclivities, who we're attracted to sexually or not. But the way to social unity and the way to harmony between people and to have less strife and less conflict is if we focus first and foremost on our common humanity. And, you know, and some people would put it theologically and say we're all created in the image of God, so we're different from the animals. Yeah. But if we focus on that, then all these other things, you know, sexual orientation and skin color and ethnicity and so on, if they're there, they're real, but they're not front and center, we have a foundation for getting along if we recognize that we're all created in the image of God. Conversely, if you're fixated, as the social justice warriors are, if you're fixated on skin color and sexual orientation and whatever, and if you're into this oppression narrative where there's this perpetual conflict, warfare between, it's all, you know, men are oppressing women and straight people are oppressing gay people and light-skinned people are oppressing dark-skinned people. If that's your lens, it's just perpetual social conflict and yeah, it's very bad.
Well, it's replacing God with an ideology, right? You know, it's commonly referred to as our humanity, and it seems like there is a growing group of individuals who are increasingly losing touch with that. But myself as a Christian person, what I recognize it as is the Spirit of God that connects us all to each other. And that's what we're losing. That is our humanity. And it's because we have removed God or any spiritual foundation from the equation that now we are left with nothing more than this ideology that is designed to do nothing other than destroy. And that's where we are at the logical conclusion of that now with Bill C-2, C-8, and next C-9, right? This is the logical conclusion where, because we are inherently dangerous to ourselves and each other, we need to be perpetually governed forever. And so, John, let's move on to C-9. What is in that bill that Canadians and Americans and anybody paying attention really needs to be looking out for?
So it empowers judges to as much as double sentences if the judge feels that a crime was motivated by hate. So, for example, let's say you commit armed robbery, you go into a convenience store in the middle of the night with a baseball bat or a knife or a gun or whatever. You threaten the clerk and say, give me all the cash in your till, otherwise I'm going to stab you or shoot you or beat you with the baseball bat. So there's a crime. If you're found guilty, if the judge believes that you also had hate as part of your motivation, so maybe you were name calling the clerk and using racial slurs because they were Korean or East Indian or whatever, the maximum penalty, if the maximum penalty for that crime is 2 years, it can become 5 years. 5-year maximum penalty can become 10 years. A 10-year maximum penalty can become 14 years. A 14-year maximum penalty can become life in prison. So for all crimes, let's say murder, you kill somebody. Okay, first-degree murder, life in prison. Well, maybe that's not a good example because life's already the maximum. Maybe let's say anyway, the point is whatever the crime is, the judge can increase the sentence if the judge feels that hate was a motivating factor. Now,
isn't just to interject, but especially as it relates to violent crime, isn't hate the motivating factor in pretty much all of them?
Yeah, but not the legally relevant kind of hate as created by Canadian legislation, right? Because you could hate the guy. Let's say that you find out your wife's cheating on you, and you find out who the guy is, so you hate the guy, so you stab him to death or you shoot him. Well, that's already, it would be first-degree murder or manslaughter, but there's already hatred there. I guess if, prior to shooting him, and let's say the guy's a certain ethnic group, and you say, like you blankety blank blank, and you say that, you members of your ethnic group, you're all a bunch of scum, and, we should never have let you come into Canada. And you say that to him before pulling the trigger to kill him. You could get a harsher sentence than if you just, killed the guy because you're upset with him for sleeping with your wife.
So no racial slurs while committing a murder, essentially. Be careful, guys.
Just be careful. Yeah, if it's armed robbery, if you're beating somebody up, if you're assaulting somebody, even shoplifting, just keep your mouth shut. Take the item, walk out quietly. You don't want to be, you don't want a stiffer sentence because you're accused of hate
because your language was inappropriate. That's right. Yeah.
It's the other aspects of C-9. So that's probably the scariest part, is that they give this far greater sentencing, far greater punishments. They ban the public display of the Nazi swastika, the hooked cross. Curiously, not the hammer and sickle. So it's very political legislation because more people were murdered by communists in Russia and China and Cambodia and other countries under the banner of the hammer and sickle. You've got tens of millions of people deliberately murdered. Now, I'm a free speech advocate, so I think if you want to wave your red communist flag with the yellow hammer and sickle or whatever colors, if you want to wave that flag, you are waving something that was the banner under which tens of millions of people have been murdered. But if that's what you want to do, you can do that, right? Yeah. That's okay. You can wave the hammer and sickle, not the Nazi swastika. And then there are exceptions, though, which is good. I mean, if you're going to bring this in, I'm glad there's exceptions. There's a religious exemption. And this is interesting because there are Buddhists and Hindus all over the world, including in Canada. They will display the swastika on their homes because the swastika, the hooked cross, is an ancient Sanskrit symbol for prosperity. And I've seen these carved onto homes above the door. You see a swastika. Chances are it's not a Nazi sympathizer. It is a Hindu or a Buddhist who is displaying that as a religious symbol. So there is an exemption. So you can display swastikas, but not the Nazi swastika. So there you go. So those are some of the issues with C-9.
I just want to say this. What was hilarious to me is I'm reading C-9 and I see the swastika and SS insignias directly referenced. And and
Islamic terrorist groups, sorry.
Right.
Some symbols or Middle Eastern terrorist groups. There's a long list of all these banned terrorist groups. And whatever their symbols are, I don't even know. But those are also banned.
Well, I look at the swastika thing and I'm like, these fucking idiots. Their only point of reference in history is Nazi Germany. And if you were to pull most of the MPs in Parliament, in Canada's Parliament aside and just ask them basic cursory questions about that period in time, they wouldn't know a damn thing. And that's the part that makes me angry about this, is that you have people who have been elected to create laws and to write legislation that will have a permanent impact on the lives of millions of people who don't know what they're doing. And it's obvious that they don't. Now, you could put on your tinfoil hat, as I do often. I proudly wear mine, and go down the conspiracy road and say that this is all part of a larger agenda, which is what I believe. But I don't believe these people know what they're a part of. I don't think they know. I think these people are that stupid, right?
You saw an illustration of this when they had this Nazi Ukrainian soldier. These people are so completely ignorant of history that when they had identified a soldier, they just thought, oh, well, it's Ukraine versus Russia. So, we're on the side of Ukraine. We're against Russia. So he's a good guy. So we're going to have the entire House of Commons applaud for somebody that was a soldier for a pro-Nazi militia or army or regime that was allied with Germany. But they're so stupid. They don't know anything about history. They don't understand that when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, that a lot of Ukrainians were, I think, justifiably and understandably very happy about that, because they had suffered the Holodomor, the genocide against the Ukrainians. They hated Stalin. Many of them didn't want to be part of the Soviet Union. So when the Nazis invaded the Soviet Union, you had, it wasn't even, technically pro-Nazi, yes, but it's more nuanced and complicated than that.
Yeah.
These people, they don't know anything about that. It's, Ukrainian soldier. Yeah, let's give him a big round of applause.
What was funny to me throughout that whole thing was if you watch the video, there is one guy in Parliament when they say, a member of the Ukrainian army who fought in the Second World War, he looks and he goes, oh shit, like these people have no idea. Like you've brought an SS foot soldier into our, you know what I mean? Like, but
that's a big round of applause.
Exactly. Right. But that's the thing is, like, John, these people, what's dangerous about this is that these people are too stupid to do their jobs. And these are the people who are introducing hate speech legislation. Right. And in Canada, the situation that we have is that we have this bloated, all-encompassing bureaucracy that seems to be in control of everything from our academic to our legacy media institutions. So in terms of penetrating that wall, say, for example, being a constitutional lawyer like yourself, it is incredibly difficult, as you outlined earlier when you were, and this was just against the Alberta provincial government. Now, if you're talking about going against Canada's federal government and challenging their laws, boy, oh boy, buckle up, man, because you're going to be doing that for a long time if you can afford it. And so this is where we're at. We have this group of incredibly stupid people who I believe have been maybe, I would say, installed to push forward an agenda that seems to be coming to every single Western nation.
It could be top down to some extent, because I get asked about this, like, well, who's behind this? Who's behind this? And look, human nature is a mixture of good and evil, and sometimes there's bad people with bad ideas that collaborate together to do bad things. And I think there's some of that going on up to a point. I also believe, though, that the biggest driver is culture. Law follows politics, politics follows culture, culture to a considerable extent follows education.
Yes.
In the broad sense, including, what are you teaching your kids at home, but also what are they being taught in a school? If you're sending your kids to school, if you're not homeschooling, what are they being taught there at the elementary, high school, university levels? So this all flows from culture. And so you've got this culture where we've had a gradual erosion the last 50 years, whereby people no longer understand or appreciate the free society in the way that we did 50 years ago. We believed fervently that our parliamentary democracy and the rule of law and the government respecting our basic rights and freedoms of expression, association, religion, conscience, peaceful assembly, the rights of the accused person to a fair trial and to be presumed innocent until proven guilty, right to bodily autonomy, to not get pressured or coerced into getting injected with something you don't want to be injected with. All of that stuff, like the vast majority of Canadians understood and understood the free society, why it was important. They believed, as I believe today, that the free society is superior to tyranny, whether it's tyranny under the banner of National Socialism or theocracy or the hammer and sickle, or whether it's woke, equity, diversity, inclusion, the exterior doesn't really matter. So where we're at now in Canada, and even in the US, although I think the US is probably in much better shape, but where we're at in Canada is that a lot of people don't really appreciate or understand our rights and freedoms. They don't really believe that our parliamentary democracy with government respecting rights and freedoms is actually better than a repressive regime. And we saw this with lockdowns where you had, a good 1/3, 1/2, 2/3 of the population to varying degrees were either accepting of the taking away of our rights and freedoms without protest, or in some cases saying, lock us down harder, take away more of our rights and freedoms. So we need to change the culture, because I think a lot of this, yes, there could be some coordination, orchestration from on high. There could be some very powerful, very bad people that are collaborating together. Yes, that could be true. But fundamentally, it's arising from the bottom up, out of our rotten culture, that we need to reform.
That's a fantastic point. That's a beautiful point, because it's true. I have expressed my frustration with mainstream Canadians many times on this podcast and on my live streams. And exactly what you said is the problem. It's that we have this population of people who exist within a culture that is desperate to be dictated to. They wouldn't know what to do if the government didn't tell them what to do. And we have to snap out of that mentality, right? Like, to be a truly free person, you have to have autonomous thought. You have to be able to move through the world on your own without the assistance or the diktats of a tyrannical government always hovering over you. But that's what Canadians are used to, and that's what it seems like they want.
Many, but fortunately on our side, one thing I feel encouraged by is we have a stronger freedom movement in Canada today in 2025 than what we did in 2019. I have met so many people the last 5.5 years since lockdowns were imposed, March of 2020, who said that before lockdowns, they never paid any attention to anything, not laws passed by federal parliament or provincial legislature, didn't follow the news, were not involved in politics at all, would never have taken out a political party membership to remove from office a tyrant like Jason Kenney, who here was removed by Albertans who took out a membership in his political party and forced him out.
Yeah.
But so these people, so today we've got this large minority of awake, alert, active citizens, and the next wave of tyranny, and it will come. But whether it's done in the name of, everybody's got to get injected because we got this new scary virus, or whether it's done, we have to live within our 15-minute prison district or, 15-minute cities, to save ourselves from the impending climate holocaust. Okay, whatever the pretext is, the governments are going to get way more pushback now or in 2026, 2027 than what they did in 2020, because there's an army, a small army, but a small, committed, dedicated army of alert, awake Canadians who are going to be fighting strongly for freedom that just weren't there in 2019.
Agreed. I mean, I include myself in that bunch, right? Like I never imagined having a podcast, being in front of a camera, talking to people. That was never what I did or I ever had any aspirations to do. But I did for the same reason that I think hundreds and thousands of other Canadians are doing the same thing, because we feel like we have a duty and we have to step out and say something. And I mean, I know you guys have been involved in, upholding Canada's Charter of Rights when it is frequently infringed upon for many, many years. But for a lot of us, we're brand new to this. And I think that there is a growing resistance. Now, I got to ask you this question. How on earth did our liberal government or, our federal liberals ever think that something like Bill C-2, C-8, and C-9 would pass through Parliament without anybody noticing?
I try to avoid like what's going on inside the minds of some people. I don't know. I try to stay away because it's so speculative, right? Like you can guess, and some of your guesses might be educated, and some of your guesses might be correct. But look, I would say it's this bottom-up cultural phenomenon where you've got a lot of people especially probably more so in the Liberal Party and the Bloc and the NDP and the Greens than, but the virus has infected the Conservative Party of Canada as well.
Yes.
But you've got this notion that it's okay to trample on rights and freedoms if it's for a really good cause, like promoting equity, diversity, inclusion. And if it's, here's the interest. Historically, people who know even a little bit about history will know that politicians never take away your rights and freedoms without offering a nice sounding pretext. So when the communists took power in Russia in 1917, they said, we're going to protect you from the evil capitalists who are exploiting you. But in order to protect you, we have to burn down your churches and raise your kids to be good communists, etc. And then Adolf Hitler in Germany, barely 10 years later, is saying, well, look at how these terrible communists are destroying Russia. Look at the evil they've done. I can save you and protect you from the communists and the Jews. But in order to do that, I have to take away your rights and freedoms, and we have to abolish democracy, no more elections, no more freedom of speech. But it's for your own good. We have to restore German honor and greatness, and we have to liberate ourselves from the injustice of the Versailles Treaty. So I'm going to protect you against the communists and Jews by taking away your rights and freedoms. And then there's always, name me one dictator, in theocratic Iran, theocratic Saudi Arabia, it's to protect the salvation of your souls. We have to impose this theocracy and flog you or execute you if you blaspheme Islam, or kill you if you convert away from Islam, because it's for the common good, it's for the benefit of everybody, it's for the salvation of your souls. So we have to take away your rights and freedoms to promote Islam. So today in Canada, it's like, well, we've got to protect you from hate and misinformation and disinformation, and we've got to protect the LGBTQ, and we have to do this and that. So we got to take away your rights and freedoms. Don't worry, it's all for a good cause.
And I could, and that's exactly it. And to be honest with you, John, I could never imagine being a person so weak that I desire protection from my government. What's interesting about everything that's happening in the world right now, like I have a number of Iranian friends, Payman Askari, who I do my live streams with every Friday, and a bunch of people behind the scenes that I know and love deeply. And they're kind of caught in a little bit of a conundrum because they despise Israel, but they hate Khamenei more. And so they're cheering on Israel because they want to see this fundamentalist Islamic regime obliterated in Iran. So that should tell you the desire for freedom overrides a decades-long hatred of another state. Right. And that's, so now here we are in Canada, we're entertaining all of these things, stuff that has already come down the pike in Europe, specifically Britain. And you can see now in Britain that they are moving toward a digital ID. So, John, do you see these laws leading us toward a digital ID system?
Well, Bill C-2 makes it illegal to use cash in amounts greater than 10,000. Now, the argument that's raised against, in favor of this, is saying, look, practically speaking, you don't need, you're not using, with very few exceptions, right? You could probably count on one hand the number of Canadians that are, although some used car purchases, people sometimes they want cash and not an e-transfer or something, but it's not that often that we use $10,000 cash to donate to a charity or to make a purchase or to pay an invoice. But the problem is this, right? We tend to lose our rights and freedoms bit by bit. And so if we lose the right to, let's say that we're in a business deal and, relationship, and you perform some services for me, you send me an invoice for $10,000. You could say, well, practically speaking, John, why do you want to drive up to where Jason lives and give him $10,000 cash? Why don't you just pay him by credit card or cash or e-transfer? And that's not the point. The point is I should have the freedom to do that. And our contract can also dictate, freedom of contract. You could say you want payment by cash, by check, or we could both agree that I'm not allowed to pay by cash, but that would be our private agreement in our own contract. And so, it's the same logic to say, well, you're not going to say that the X group of people based on religion, ethnicity, that they're the scum of the earth and we should all put them to death. And we should, you don't want to say something like that anyway. So let's make it illegal. Let's make it criminal. It's like, that's not the point, right? Like, no, I wouldn't say something like that, but I don't want the government to be determining what is true or false, hateful or not hateful, which is why, we're better off, especially with the current times. Maybe this argument wouldn't have been as strong 20 years ago, but we're better off now scrapping the restrictions on speech in the name of curbing so-called hate. We're better off without that law entirely with the way the world's going right now.
100%. I mean, look, I'll take it from me. Look, I do this podcast. A lot of people listen to it, and I get called an idiot like every other day, frequently on the internet. You I just grow some fucking balls, man. Like that's my attitude. It's like, why does everybody require protection from hurt feelings? And John, this is something that I wanted to bring up, and I spoke to Bruce about it briefly, but what it appears is that we have become a society governed not by laws, but by emotions.
Mm-hmm.
Right? That we are in this place now where the law doesn't really matter because it really just depends on your subjective interpretations of the event that you experienced and how it made you feel. And if it made you feel bad, then the people on the other side of that, as long as they agree with the current ruling ideology, well, then those people are the right people and you deserve to be punished. And I want to make this clear to people. This doesn't just exist on the left. Look at what's happening right now in the United States with the Trump administration, right? They are free to attack and pursue left-wing groups now because people on the right are upset that those people exist. So now, rather than following law, we are following emotion. And it's who I dislike that determines what happens going forward legally. So you can justify destroying somebody's life or the lives of an entire group of people based on whether or not you like them. And we saw that with Justin Trudeau during the Freedom Convoy, right?
One of the many problems we face in Canada is a breakdown in the rule of law, as exemplified by a double standard in prosecutions. And so you saw, for example, in Manitoba, there were some Aboriginals protesting against residential schools. They vandalized and tore down a statue of Queen Victoria in broad daylight with police watching. This is obviously and blatantly criminal conduct. You can legally destroy your own property if you want, but it's illegal to destroy somebody else's property. It's illegal to destroy public property. So here they're committing a crime in broad daylight. Police stand by and watch. The Manitoba Crown Prosecutor's Office announces sometime thereafter that there's nobody will be charged. There'll be no arrests. There'll be no prosecutions. Why? Well, they didn't say why. They vaguely appeal to the public interest. No explanation. But the reason is it's the correct people protesting for the correct cause. Now you get Tamara Leach, Chris Barber in Ottawa, and they're protesting against the lockdown or against the vaccine passports, and indirectly, implicitly, they're also protesting against lockdowns as well. Well, that's the wrong cause, and so the Crown prosecutes them very aggressively, spends probably millions of dollars on this prosecution with something 49 days that Tamara Leach spent in jail. I don't know if the court time for the trial could have also been 40 something days. The number escapes me. Massive resources. And meanwhile, the same Crown prosecutors in Ontario complain that they don't have enough resources to properly prosecute people accused of rape and murder and aggravated assault who are walking free because they couldn't get the trial done within the 30 months as required by the Supreme Court of Canada in the Jordan ruling. So you have this double standard where Trudeau will want to meet with, if you're protesting in favor of the Aboriginals or in favor of, saving us from the climate holocaust, seeing as mankind controls the climate, as we all know. So if you're protesting for saving us from the climate holocaust, Prime Minister will sit down and meet with you. But if you're protesting against lockdowns, vaccine passports, maybe abortion, maybe protesting for Israel, if it's for the wrong cause, you're going to get arrested and prosecuted. And that's a sick problem in Canada. Double standard.
Totally. And the residential school thing is a really good example of what we have to look forward to. So For example, the residential school mass grave story is a total hoax. There has never been a body found. The entire premise of the story is based on hearsay within the communities that claim that children were buried at these schools. They have looked, there have been no bodies found. However,
well, they haven't looked. They got paid $12 million to excavate, and they haven't spent a penny of it on excavation. We are years later. They got 12. The Kamloops Indian band, I can't pronounce the name they have on their website. They got $12 million tax dollars to do an excavation, which is the only way you can find out whether there's bodies of children or anybody actually buried there, because the ground penetrating radar can detect, it'll beep when you have a tree stump or a stone or an irrigation pipe. Sorry,
okay.
I interrupted you.
No.
Yeah,
Fair enough.
But nothing found, and they refused to spend the money on doing an excavation to find the truth. Meanwhile, they're talking about a National Truth and Reconciliation Day. Well, if you love truth, do the excavation.
Right. But here's the thing. So great point, John. So they've used LiDAR. They've surveyed the areas. They found nothing via the ground penetrating radar. Right. But this narrative of dead bodies, children of dead bodies buried at residential schools, has entered the mainstream and become part of the lexicon. So according to the hearsay of a bunch of different groups of people, because they are part of a victim class or a protected class, their narrative becomes part of the lexicon. And even though it's not true, it becomes true. And so yes, under these laws, Bill C-8 and C-9, you saying that the residential school mass graves are a hoax is considered a hate crime, even though what you're saying is true.
It could be considered a hate crime. And we've actually this is more of a symptom of our sick culture. There's a member of parliament a year or 2 years ago. I don't know if she got reelected in April or not. An NDP member of parliament from one of the Winnipeg ridings said that it should be a crime to deny the residential school Holocaust. I don't know if she said Holocaust or not, but residential school denialism. So if you don't have, the dominant narrative that this was completely evil, completely wrong, it was an attempted genocide, blah, blah. If you don't, and children were murdered and it was all evil. If you don't subscribe to that, because maybe you went to maybe you went to a residential school and you had a positive experience, and there have been, not so much today, but 40 years ago, 30 years ago, there were Aboriginals who publicly, and maybe they were the minority, I don't know, but they said that they were grateful they went to the residential school because they learned how to read and write and they learned how to speak English, and they attribute their career success to having gone to residential school rather than having stayed on the reserve and perhaps not learned to speak English, not learned to read and write. So anyway, my point is this, the culture is so sick that you would have people that would criminalize residential school denialism. It's not on the books, but it could be prosecuted as hate speech because, you could get a policeman, a Crown prosecutor that hear you say that, there's no bodies buried there, it's a hoax, say things like that. You could face prosecution. Now, good chance of getting acquitted at the end of the day, but what a horrible thing to go through. That's criminal prosecution hanging over your head for a year or 2 years, 3 years.
Not to mention the public flogging, right? That's the part of this. So I'm talking to Kevin Vuong in the next few days, and he was targeted by China as a member of the Canada's Liberal Party, now as an independent, right? But we're going to be telling his story, and what's interesting about that story is that by the time he was exonerated for what he was accused of, it was already in the public, and that's what they do to you. It's a public death. It's a public execution. It's a reputational execution. Right. And that's what you face. So even though you may not go to jail for the rest of your life for saying that there have been no bodies found at any of these residential schools, which is the truth. And by the way, I am somebody with family members who passed through that residential school system. And this pisses me off beyond anything because it trivializes the experiences of people that I love. OK, but that aside, right, what we're looking at is a situation where exactly what you said, you have a narrative that's constructed by an ideology that becomes true strictly because it is one that is attached to what is considered a protected class or a victim class. And that's it. That's all you need. And you could end up having your name just irreparable reputational damage. And the thing is, what's worse than going to prison for the rest of your life? Being on the outside and not being able to get a job, being virtually unemployable because of what was said about you publicly, what was perpetrated by the media. And that's what we're looking at.
I agree with you 100%. I would add, on a positive note, it is within our power to change the culture. And even though freedom of expression is under very serious attack in Canada, I don't want to minimize it. And certainly things like the Online Harms Act, which we didn't even get into today, but maybe we can cover another time. This was the old bill C-63, which died on the order paper. And then we had our election in April 2025. So it's dead. But they've threatened to bring it back. That Online Harms Act would unleash a further wave of tyranny and would empower the Canadian Human Rights Commission to prosecute Canadians over non-criminal offensive speech. Right? So so that Canadian Human Rights Tribunal, they would go a lot broader. I mean, you can the hate speech provisions that have been with us for 30 years. They do have some chilling effect on speech, but you can at least defend yourself. One of the defenses you have is truth. So if you can, I mean, it's not that helpful. It only comes into play if you're being criminally prosecuted. Okay, so it's not wonderful, but at least you could have truth as a defense against criminal hate speech prosecution. Under the if Bill C-63 comes back and the Canadian Human Rights Commission gets power to also prosecute speech, you're going to see such a chilling effect because they can impose penalties under the Online Harms Act. It was a penalty of up to $50,000 payable to the government, plus $20,000 plus up to $20,000 payable to somebody who felt hurt by what you said. So you could be out of pocket $70,000 plus tens of thousands of dollars in legal fees to try to defend yourself spread over a period of years. Sorry, I'm undermining my own point. My point is we still have a lot of free expression left in Canada. We're not the United Kingdom. We risk becoming the United Kingdom, but we're not there. So we can use our free speech to change our culture. And it's that cultural change that's going to restore the rights and freedoms that we've lost.
Yes. And as you've lost one of your ear monitors, John, I got one last final question for you before we go.
I can hear you in the other one. I'm fine.
So this looks to be a coordinated effort. You see these same things rolling out in Australia, Britain, Germany, France, Ireland, Italy, all Western nations. Well, not Italy so much. We'll take them out of the picture. But across Western nations that seem to be dominated by a prevailing liberal ideology. John, this can be a simple yes or no question. We don't have to go into depth, but do you, as somebody who is inside the legal frameworks of this and understands how it operates, do you see this as being a coordinated effort, something coming down from outside?
I think it's a mix of, there is some top-down stuff. There's some very bad people who are very powerful, who are working together, who are in touch with each other. That's part of it. But the other big part is just it's the underlying culture. This is why the United States, I think, is standing stronger for free speech than other countries. It's because fundamentally their culture has stronger, healthier appreciation for the importance of free speech than, say, what we do in Canada. And in Canada, our appreciation is stronger than in the United Kingdom, where it's just eroded harder. So I think, there's some top-down bad stuff going on. So it's a coordinated effort, an orchestrated effort. Yes, probably up to a point. However, organized elites cannot take away our rights and freedoms without our consent. So fundamentally, if we have a pro-freedom culture, then the Klaus Schwabs and the Mark Carneys and all these people, they can have as many meetings as they want in Davos, and they can plan and strategize and craft, and they can do all their stuff. It's just not going to work, right? Yeah. Because tyrants need slaves, and slaves look to tyrants for leadership and guidance. So if we turn ourselves more into, many of you and I and many other people, we are free people. We think for ourselves. We're adults. We're not, these pathetic, oh, I need the government to tell me what to think. We're not in that category, right? But if we transform the culture, and as long as we have more adults, awake, alert adults who don't want tyranny, if we are the majority, then we can resist and defeat the efforts of what the elites might be trying to do from a top-down perspective.
Fantastic. Now, I know you only have a few minutes left. You have other interviews to do today and other speeches to give. So, John, I just have one last question. What can we do to beat this stuff?
Stay awake, stay alert, be informed, be engaged in the democratic process. People say, we had an interesting development just recently where the federal government, and I apologize, I haven't finished looking into this, and I've got a bunch of phone calls and emails into federal government media people, but there's rumors I've heard, which might be true, that the government is moving away from Bill C-2, and they've introduced Bill C-12 instead, which is still bad, but it's a lot less bad. I don't quite know the status for today, so I'm just sticking with what I know about Bill C-2. Everything I said about Bill C-2 is true, but we might be moving away from it. Why? Because there's public backlash, and it wasn't just the Justice Center, but there's the Canadian Civil Liberties Association and Professor Michael Geist at the University of Ottawa, law prof, who is not known to be a conservative or libertarian or freedom warrior kind of guy, but he was concerned about it. So there's this big outcry against the federal government over Bill C-2, and it appears that they're, backing away from it. So anyway, all of that to say, be engaged in the democratic process, contact your MP, contact your MLA or MPP provincially, and tell your MP to vote against bills C-2, C-8, C-9, and it does make a difference.
Absolutely. And, that's the important thing, awareness, right? Just being aware and making sure that others are aware and sharing your point of view. Because as we saw with Justin Trudeau, and I think I will include Mark Carney and his same Liberal government, because it's all the same people, they are very responsive to public opinion. If they feel they are losing the support of the public, or if they feel that they are on the bad side of public opinion, they will pull certain legislation. So keep talking, keep sharing the information, and keep sharing your point of view. John, thank you so much for your time today, man. I know you're a really busy guy, especially as Canada kind of drifts down this river toward nothing. But before we go, John, can you tell everybody where they can find you and find your work?
So Justice Center for Constitutional Freedoms, JCCF. So the website is www.jccf, Justice Center Constitutional Freedoms.ca. And you can sign up for a free email newsletter that we send out once or twice a month. And if you wish to donate, donations are welcome of any amount. This $1,000 or $100 or $10, every bit helps. And Jason, thanks for having me on your show. It's a real honor, and hope to speak with you again.